This is Blake Temez with the Blake Temez podcast, where I speak as a Catholic layman to Catholic laymen about missional living, wisdom cultivation, and legacy building in service of Christ and his bride, the Church. Thanks for being here. I'm going to be thinking through in real time some concepts that were covered regarding gender in a recent issue of a magazine from New Polity. Now, New Polity is a think tank that deals in post-liberal political theology, and they're in Steubenville, Ohio, and basically a group of Catholics thinking about how to address contemporary social issues in light of the Catholic faith and in ways that transcend the typical red-blue divide that characterizes politics. So they're trying to do something new there and do it through theology, through social action on a local scale, and educating people to approach these things with a Catholic worldview. And so their recent issue of their magazine on gender presents essays by theologians, both contemporary and ancient. And in the introduction to the issue, one of their editors, Mark Barnes, presented a helpful set of ideas about how conservatives make a mistake when they reduce gender to just materialist concerns, to a materialist dimension. For example, when a conservative, and I'm using that term broadly, you could say conservative theologian, a conservative politician, just conservatives in general, make an argument against progressives who hold views on sex and gender that are more aligned with contemporary gender theory and transgenderism and that type of thing, insofar as those things reflect an intellectual movement. When conservatives address that other collective group, they'll make claims about manhood or womanhood being located in one's material reality, and so that being enough. In other words, it's enough to describe a man by saying that they have male genitals and produce male, hormones. It's all about those dimensions, right? And then similarly for the female, there's female genitalia, there's the ovum, there's that childbearing capacity, etc., etc. And so they make their case by saying, look, it's in the body, right? So enough with all of the crazy talk about gender being a social construct, and so, it's what you want to make it, and so there's this fluidity and all of that. And of course, there's weight to a portion of their argument when they associate or identify gender with the physical or the material. It's just not enough of the story. It's not a complete story. And in some sense, they're making the same mistake that progressives are making on the other side of the spectrum, when progressives will say, yes, sex is in the body, gender is about bodily realities, and so we can modify bodies surgically or medically or in different ways such that they align with a certain gender, right? So yes, it's in the body, and then we can modify the body to correspond to the psychological experience or however it's being described in that particular case. And of course, there's nuance across the board here. It is difficult to summarize any one position in just a matter of seconds. And so I know that there's some of that in my conversation here. So there's that acknowledgement, but we don't have the time right now to look into all of those nuances, and I would benefit greatly from a conversation partner in this regard who has a greater degree of familiarity with the different positions that different actors within the conversation have taken. That being said, one contribution to the whole gender debate, if that's what you want to call it, that I feel is made in the new Polity magazine is these set of thoughts from Barnes where he talks about how it is a mistake to present men and women as, or let's say an individual man or an individual woman, imagining individuals, as lacking in some like substantial way without participation in a relationship with a member of the opposite sex. So, to put that in other words, think about how a lot of romantic presentations of relationships will talk about finding your other half and being completed by the other person, and imagines the complementarity between man and woman as being most expressed when that lack is made up through a relationship with the other. And there's merit to the idea of complementarity, certainly, but what Barnes is pointing out is that every individual is a complete expression of a human person and should not be understood as fundamentally lacking in that way, right? There's other ways that we could talk about lack in terms of our capacity and our need for God and for grace. But insofar as I'm understanding Barnes's point is, you know, the woman is not a deficient male or a being who is deficient without a male, and nor is the man a deficient woman or a being that is deficient without woman in some way. And so there's, I think, a helpful understanding there, one that I need to explore more fully. I need to return to this and think about it insofar as it recognizes dignity, right, between the sexes and a complementarity without falling into like pre-Christian ideas about the separation into male and female being some type of punishment, right? That is only remedied by finding and searching for one's soulmate and then uniting and then somehow making up for that lack that was a punishment in the beginning. And so this one, I'm realizing the more that I talk through it, is a little bit of messier. I have to clarify my thinking on this to a greater degree. So just want to admit that and encourage curiosity, because as I mentioned in a previous episode, it can be awkward to discuss things like masculinity and femininity and gender in general, because in many ways they are meant to be experienced and lived and not necessarily probed at. You know, there's benefit to being a part of a culture where there are certain norms that are taken for granted, right, that allow us to live and go about our lives without having to, peel apart every assumption. But it seems that our present time, there is a necessity to look at some of those givens and make sure that we have a clear articulation of terms so that what we advocate for when it comes to how to live out masculinity and femininity, it's undergirded by a deep understanding that is not simply faddish or reactionary, and not giving in to either of those extremes. So, more to think through here. I'll revisit it in a future episode. So, thank you for your time and attention, and God bless you and all of your efforts. Peace. If you're a young Catholic man or a mentor, missionary, or minister who works with them, or even just a concerned figure in their life, a parent, uncle, whoever it might be on the lookout for the release of a short guide that I'm putting together called Brothers by Blood: How to Forge a New Path for Catholic Manhood. In it, I'll expand on some of the topics in this podcast and give you some points of reflection to see about how you can be a part of a movement that empowers men and brings them to their full potential for their sake and also for the benefit of the church and, by extension, the benefit of all society. So, again, thank you for being a part of this, and look out for more information about the release of my guide in episodes to come.